Good morning, everyone, and very much welcome to another Flash Friday. It's the 10th of December 2021, and we're very much looking forward to having an insightful conversation again this morning with you. And we're looking forward to highlight you, especially what is happening in open banking. And to be able to do that, we work, of course, with our distinguished guest as usual. But today we've got a very special one. It's Jan van Vonno from Tink. Good morning, Jan.
Good morning, Don. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show, and especially as Director of Research and Thought Leadership at Tink, you're in the midst of everything that's going on in open banking. So I'm really curious to pick your brain today and see what's going on behind the scenes, so we can get a bit of a view of what's happening out in open banking, and of course what Tink is working on at the moment. So very, very much looking forward to having our conversation. For everyone who's tuning in, please feel free to leave your questions in the comments. We're happy to pick them up if they come by. And I hope in any case you find this session insightful. Let us know. Jan, to start with you. You're based here in the Netherlands, right? Working for Tink that's originally based out of Sweden. What do you do and what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I think you already introduced my title, so research and thought leadership. So that's basically what I do. I started back in 2018 when Tink was about 50 people, and today we're counting 500 people. But I embraced the challenge to help Tink educate the market on how open banking is maturing and what the implications would be for the financial services industry. And so what that means for me on the daily basis is I work closely with our marketing organization in producing research reports and insights that our customers and prospects and other executives can use in order to navigate strategic decisions within their day-to-day business. But I also work quite a bit on the public affairs side, participating in industry associations and providing feedback to regulators. And of course, making sure that all of those insights are then communicated back internally for product strategy, as well as to customers and helping them understand that we know where the future is heading.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's a really interesting role, right? So I think you get to discover what's going on outside all the time and making the liaison with your own organization. That's quite interesting. So especially if you look into, for example, also from a regulatory field, do you think that the thinking about open banking and the work that Tink does, has that changed much over time?
Well, I think we're back where we started, to be honest. So I mean, open banking isn't new. Tink was founded back in 2012. We're working with organizations that started their open banking journey back in 2004. And actually, if you can find the first traces of open banking before the mainstream adoption of the internet. So, I mean, open banking isn't this new concept that's been introduced, but I think with PSD2, what the regulator has done is really embrace this as a legitimate service and recognize that there's value that can be created through these services, that it increases competition, that it inspires for innovation, but that the right measures need to be taken. And so I think the introduction of strong customer authentication, but also the RTS, the regulatory technical standards for SEA and common and secure standards for communication, those were additional complementary pieces of regulation that ensure that whenever a third party has access to an account or access to customer information or payment services, that we make sure that the right measures are taken from a security, privacy, and integrity perspective. So I think a lot of that was already in place, and I think a lot of that has been welcomed. But what the regulator is now seeing is that actually some of those measures may have actually squeezed a little bit the type of innovation that could come from open banking, and so we're going back to where we started and trying to see if we can revisit some of those measures.
Exactly. So, but then you actually, because I think indeed the EU pushed forward because they've seen that the banking industry was moving too slow to actually open up. They tried to enforce it, but now they actually see that some of these measures might actually have also created a squeeze, as you mentioned. And what kind of direction do you see where things might be heading? So what do you think are the biggest bottlenecks? I think you wrote about this already before as well, after the EU published again their own evaluation of PSD2. What do you think is coming up?
Yeah, so before I go into what's happening in the EU and the EBA recently, I'd like to first, for everyone who's listening, help them understand how we look at open banking, because we look at open banking in a much broader perspective than just the scope of PSD2, so the Payment Services Directive. For us, open banking relates to everything to everything concerning the exchange of data and services between financial institutions and third-party providers in order to deliver enhanced capabilities or experiences to the market. And what that means is that from our perspective, any form of API exchange, whether it's for a service or for data, it can be considered part of an open banking spectrum. Now, part of that is regulated by this directive called PSD2, and within that, there are certain measures articulated in the RTS. And what they specifically try to regulate is what they call access to accounts. So third parties that are licensed under PSD2 can be authorized by a user, by an end customer, to gain access to their account information and payment services in order to retrieve that information and innovate or provide new services on top of it, or to initiate transactions from bank to bank. So without using any of the, let's say, ancillary rules that have been developed through the cards or through other alternative payment methods. So where I think the EU has recently sort of revisited some of these things is, of course, in the recent consultation by the EBA. So the EBA recently admitted that a requirement which is articulated in Article 10 of the RTS around the SEA for access to accounts, which can be exempted every 90 days, that needs to be revisited. And specifically because they noticed that in certain countries and for certain banks, there was no application of this exemption. In other words, every time you would access your accounts, or every time you would authorize a third party and ask them to access your accounts for information, they would be confronted with an SEA, which means you need to log into your bank account.
Two-factor authentication.
Yeah, and that means that not only every time, so they wanted to make that a mandatory exemption to make sure that if you do it once, at least every 90 days. During the 90-day spectrum, a TPP can access your information without you being confronted with another SEA. But they also realized that the 90-day period is actually very short, too short. And it means that for a lot of these innovators, these account information service providers, that they need to re-onboard their entire customer base every 90 days. And that's, of course, quite detrimental for a business model. So if you build a business model and you're long on providing bookkeeping software tools, or you want to provide real-time notifications on how to get, improve your the yield on your investments or savings, and then realizing that every 90 days you have to re-onboard your entire customer base, obviously that's going to be quite difficult to maintain a business model that way. So
I recognize that as well.
This.
I recognize that as well. I've basically also dropped using services because they required to basically re-authenticate while I wasn't able to, because I was not at the right place or the right time, and I just dropped them. Right, so that's indeed it's really bad for the uptake that was happening, and it's also not really in line with, I think, expectations of consumers, because they don't recognize that experience as well from other digital services.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we responded in a recent consultation to this, of course, welcoming the changes that the EBA has proposed. So a mandatory exemption and extending the 90 days to 180 days. So not every 3 months of SEA, but every 6 months an SEA, which is, of course, welcomed and really good improvement to where we are today, actually. So hopefully we'll see that in the near future. But we have also called for additional measures to be taken, and we're hoping that the EBA is going to be open to some of the things that we're proposing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some work to be done there, because indeed I think the uptake has been relatively limited. I think still on the let's say on the customer side, despite all kinds of marketing campaigns to make people aware of open banking, which I still think is kind of silly, because they don't need to know about open banking to use open banking, right? Or at least they don't need to know about PSD2 especially. But what in general is interesting is that we actually make people much more aware of data governance in general. So from that perspective, I would also expect the new data governance regulation coming up and the Digital Services Act actually to also play an important role of actually setting a cross-industry standard of data governance.
Yeah.
Because the weird thing is now that actually within PSD2 there's a data governance framework, including the strong customer authentication for access, that is not the same in other industries. And that makes it really hard for customers to actually understand what's happening and also to form a habit around actually to govern their own data.
Yeah, that's right. So in September 2021 or 2022, so September 2020, the European Commission, DG Visma, published its digital finance strategy. And actually in that document, it stated that for 2022 to 2024, it will be working on releasing a framework for what it calls open finance in conjunction with the Data Act and Data Services Act. So we're seeing now the regulators, the financial services regulators, but also regulators of the European Data Protection Board, looking at how can they install legislation that is going to help inspire the type of innovation that we're seeing within the context of open banking and within the context of PSD2, and sort of incubate that for insurances, for savings and investments, but also within telco, also within energy, or even other types of industries like healthcare. And so this is an interesting space, of course. I'd say it's a little bit too going to that direction, like the whole, let's say, open economies perspective is quite far from where Tink is currently as a business. I mean, we're in a mission to enable a new world of finance. So we're really focusing on extracting value from your financial data and innovating based on that to create the banking processes more efficient and more effective, to enable data-driven processes with real-time and accurate information, rather than, and thus replacing a lot of the manual work, the batch files, the documents, and basically contributing to the digitalization of the financial services industry while improving experiences and the convenience for customers. So we're really much focused on enhancing current banking solutions, and we're not so much focused on, let's say, aggregating all types of data within the industry, and trying to sort of create a platform for that talks about open economies or open data as such.
Okay. And I think it makes a lot of sense because currently actually the financial industry is still so far away from the other industries in the way that they're being regulated, and the way that they also still got their own data framework, basically, which you actually see that it from time to time contradicts with GDPR and, let's say, the general data protection regulations. But so as the financial industry is still being seen as a separate field, you actually see indeed that also innovation takes a different pace and a different approach to make that work. So I fully understand indeed that scope that Tink is taking there. At the same time, as a consumer, I'm always really keen to actually figure out, okay, but for me, there's actually not a difference between the data of my utility or my telco or my bank. To me, I would actually say that or my medical information, for example, I would say that they're not all equally important or sensitive, but I would want to be in control to determine which sensitive and which not.
Yeah.
But so there's, I think, still some way to go actually to before we actually come to a more general data approach. I think from a consumer perspective, and there's still a lot of education to do, right? Because I think that's one of the challenges as well, is that consumers still, well, they're basically between hope and fear very often in the way that we communicate also about, because we talk about opportunities or we talk about privacy breaches and security issues, and it's very hard to educate people in a nuanced way on how they could actually govern their data better.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, Don. One of the things, I'm actually a member of the steering group for open finance in the UK. And one of the things we discussed during this week's calls was basically the balance between ensuring that people, especially consumers, understand that with open finance, they're not sharing data, they're providing access to data. And the idea of sharing where you basically have either two owners or two users of the same set of information, I think there's semantics here, of course, but what you're essentially doing in the scope of open banking or scope of open finance is you're authorizing a trusted service provider to access your information so that you can benefit from the service that you're requesting from the service provider, right? Yep. So it's basically for your own benefit that you are giving this trusted entity access to your information, and it's I think incomparable to, for instance, what happens on social media or on LinkedIn. When I post something publicly on a social media platform, I am literally sharing my information with all of my connections. So all of my connections have this information, even though I've not explicitly provided consent to each and every one of them to retrieve that information. Of course, I know what the consequences are, but I do not have a contractual agreement in that context. And I think within the scope of open finance, we really need to make really clear that what we're essentially doing is not sharing information. We're providing access to information so that ultimately the end user, the business or consumer, can benefit from using that information in a more effective way. And to give a concrete example, what that means in practical sense, today with one of the largest PSPs in the world, we're doing real-time risk assessments when a user is requesting a credit card. We're verifying an IBAN accounts, replacing the 1 cent transaction, also for a large PSP across Europe, thus accelerating the onboarding from literally 30 minutes to just a couple seconds. I mean, that's the type of convenience that we're delivering to the market. That is not related to the sharing of data. It's all about making sure that you provide access to the information so that you can use the service that you're looking to leverage quicker and easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And do you see also a role for
looking
there, for example, to educate the market, to think about the ways, because I think this is what you're saying here about open banking working group in the UK, to think in any case about how do we tell the story, how do we help people better understand, what they can do, what they can't do, and what the risks are associated with that. Do you see Tink play a role there, a more general?
Absolutely. Sure, absolutely. I mean, Tink was originally a consumer-oriented business. So when we were founded back in 2012, our business was a personal finance management app, and you can still see a copy of that app, or a very similar version of that app with ABN AMRO GIP, for instance. So in the Netherlands, ABN AMRO was greatly inspired by what Tink was doing in Sweden, and we struck a collaboration back in 2015. Long before Tink really pivoted to become the open banking platform it is today. But even back then, it was all about educating consumers, and it was about making them aware in terms of what would be possible if they provide access to their account information. And we actually saw that there was a really strong demand among the Swedish population at the time to get better grips on one's finances. In Sweden, among certain demographics, the average number of bank accounts is 1.7. So it's actually, you have quite a large number of consumers who have bank accounts with multiple different financial institutions. And what Tink was doing was aggregating all of that and making that available in a much more intuitive and transparent way. But of course, educating them at the same time that when they provide access to that type of information, they're providing access to a regulated institution, Tink being an account information service provider, and that they can trust the Tink that the information would only be used for the services that are delivered through that financial services app, not for any other purposes. And I think Tink has a large responsibility. Now, today, we're working with over 300 enterprises, like, of course, ABN AMRO, BNP Paribas, Nordea, NatWest. They're all working with us. So we have a large set of very, very large corporate customers that have their own, let's say, communication strategies and how to educate their customers. But we're also working with over 10,000 registered developers who are all representing smaller fintechs or small businesses who are looking to sort of launch the next killer app for open banking, right?
So there you're the platform.
Yeah. Exactly. There we're the platform, and we need to make sure that they also understand that at the core of everything that we're doing is trust, and we need to make sure that that the trust in this system of regulated access to account information is not sort of jeopardized. So
no, exactly.
Yeah.
Good point, I think. Actually, it relates to a question that we're getting now in from Mario Michael, who wants to get in touch with Tink also to check in whether their solutions might actually be complementary to what Tink is doing. What would be the best way to get in touch with you on that?
Oh, yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, no problem. You just search for Jan van Vonno, IN/Jan van Vonno, and you can find me. Feel free to send me a direct message.
Okay. Yeah, in any case, that's good to know. So I hope that helps you, Mario. So because I think it's in any case nice, I can imagine that's also important for you that you work with a lot of partners to actually enhance the total suite of solutions that are becoming available on your platform and through your platform. So I think that's really cool. So do you actually have an idea on, because I think it's come from Sweden, right? And I think that's quite an important fintech hub in Europe. Any insights in why that's actually the case? Why is Sweden such a fertile ground for fintech?
Yeah, I think Sweden for sure is a market where I think a lot of the more recent startups have been inspired by the likes of the iZettles and the Klarnas, and seeing their phenomenal success. Of course, I think there's a strong cultural appetite for electronic payments. So last year, 2020, only 0.5% of the value of all transactions were in cash. I think just over 5% of the number of transactions were in cash, but it's in terms of value of transaction, it's less than 0.5% were actually in cash. So they're very strong appetite for electronic payments, but it also comes with the fact that the Swedes have invested in a digital identity service / decoupled authentication service called Bank ID, which is a bank-owned authentication mechanism that can be used at governments or at hospitals, at whatever industry. But it creates a very intuitive user journey. And I think fintechs that emerge within the Swedish market can leverage on the existing infrastructure, on the existing cultural appetite for financial services, and already starts, basically competing within that market and innovating within that market with relatively a few barriers. The primary barrier, however, is that that's one what we've also seen is talent, because it's so scarce currently in Sweden, that you see. We've set up recruitment programs to find talent in other countries to bring them to Sweden, but we've also needed to set up engineering hubs elsewhere. So we've set up engineering hubs in Poland, in Spain. We're now building out our engineering hub in the UK so that we can basically find talent in other markets as well. But that I think for the fintech ecosystem, it's a really good place to get started.
Yeah, I recognize, and I think quite some similarities as well with what's happening here in Amsterdam and the Netherlands as well, we had some early developments, especially in the payments field, which actually spun off a lot of entrepreneurship, new enterprises, new payment solutions coming up, where you see that exactly it turns into such a payment hub. It's a bit like the I think a well-known story about the PayPal mafia, for example, right? So where also again some of the original founders in the end all started again. There are other tech companies, and you got this ecosystem that keeps on growing and growing in a quite a competitive field, but where there's a lot of knowledge sharing and attraction for capital.
Yeah.
So nice to see, in any case, to be able to bridge that you also bridge these two ecosystems from that end, right? And so I mean, Tink itself is also going through quite some development, right? I think you did quite some acquisitions, and you're actually now also part of a potential acquisition as well by Visa. Quite exciting times, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we took last year, the pandemic crisis year, as an opportunity to grow inorganically. So we completed 4 acquisitions during 2020. Our first acquisition was that of Instantor, which is basically a friend Swedish aggregator slash risk decisioning company, and that acquisition was very strategic because it immediately gave us access to the capabilities that we have needed to build out our risk insights and risk decisioning products that we currently have live on the platform. So that was very strategic and very important. But we also made additional acquisitions in the UK of OpenWorks' infrastructure assets. We acquired Eurobits, one of in my opinion, the pioneer in open banking in Europe. And we acquired Fintech Systems, which hasn't been completed yet, to be fully transparent. But it's also a very strategic decision, as nearly 2/3 of all digital loans processed in the DACH region are enabled by their open banking connectivity.
Yeah.
So that gives you a little bit of perspective in terms of the volume and the scale at which they operate.
Yeah, cool. Really nice challenge. I think, so I think we're definitely keen to keep a lookout on how Tink is going to evolve. And maybe to revert on a bit on your sort of your field of expertise, right? Sort of the thought leadership. I think you because people that are listening in might want to learn more about your positions and what you do. Well, I think you publish quite a lot of papers. Can you maybe touch a little bit upon, for example, your recent one, the Follow the Money on Open Banking? I thought it was a really interesting report to see where you actually did an analysis of where the money is being invested by the industry with regard to open banking. What is your main conclusion? Sure. How could people get access to that?
So So first of all, I mean, Following the Money is our latest report. We released that on the 30th of November, and it's about the investments that financial institutions are making in the context of open banking. Now, I'm not exclusively talking about PSD2. I'm really talking about the broader spectrum of open banking, anything from, let's say, compliance-related investments to banking as a service-related investment to banking as a platform-related investments, or investments to enhance, an onboarding journey or a customer experience. But one of the main conclusions that we found is that the average investment, the mean investment, is 32 million euros in 2020, with over 40% of executives indicating that they're increasing investments again for 2021. We also found that over 90% of executives also indicated that their budgets have been impacted by the pandemic, but their spending in terms of the use cases is quite clear. So the biggest opportunity that they see is payment initiation services, leveraging this potentially as a commercial API or in order to make their own services more affordable. And we're obviously making huge investments right now in this area for 2022. So I'm excited to see how that's going to be developing. But we also saw 3 other categories of investments. So banks are also investing quite a bit in everything related to customer experience and onboarding, in risk-related use cases, And we find at the bottom of the list what we're calling open banking add-ons, but they could just as well be differentiators. Things like subscription management solutions, things like targeted advertising, loyalty schemes, and even carbon footprint calculators. And what's interesting, if you just look at retail banks, we actually find that carbon footprint calculators are considered the fourth most important investment area currently in the scope of open banking. So we're seeing mixed appetite for different use cases. And we're partnering with the likes of Kogo, Doconomy, Ecoletic to build carbon emission calculators on top of the categorized data that we aggregate from open banking connections. So we're really looking forward to the type of innovation that's going to come from this.
Yeah, great. I think that's a really interesting field, especially ESG is very much on top of the agenda within the financial industry, both from a regulatory perspective as from a societal demand perspective. And I see also quite a lot of intrinsic motivation within the industry to actually make a positive impact here. So I'm definitely good to look into that a bit more.
Yeah, and you can find more information on tink.com/resources.
Okay, yeah, that was what I was going to ask you as well, indeed. So check out the Tink website /resources to read all about the reports that Jan has been working on and the thought leadership that he's spreading all over Europe. Well, thanks a lot, Jan, for sharing your insights. It's been great to have this chat with you and get some insights on open banking and what Tink is working on these days. It was great to have you.
It was great being here. Thank you, Don.
Speak to you soon. For everyone who was tuning in, thank you very much for listening in. If you have any further questions for Jan, please reach out to us. We hope you find the talk useful as well as the reports that you can find on their site. And we're looking forward to see you again on the next Flash Friday. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. See you soon.